Close your eyes for a moment and picture waking up in a world without clocks, no ticking hands, no digital screens flashing numbers, just the vast expanse of sky above you. How would you know when to start your day, when to rest, or when the seasons were shifting? For medieval timekeepers, the answers weren't hidden in gears or springs, but written across the heavens in the silent dance of the sun, moon, and stars. These ancient observers didn't just glance upward. They studied the cosmos with a precision that would astonish us today, turning the sky into a living, breathing clock long before mechanical timepieces ever existed. Think about the last time you watched a sunset or noticed the moon's slow journey across the night. To us, it's a beautiful backdrop, but to medieval scholars and monks, these celestial movements were the very fabric of time itself. They tracked the sun's path to mark the hours, used the stars to predict the changing seasons, and even aligned their sacred rituals with the rhythms of the cosmos. Their tools weren't made of metal but of knowledge passed down through generations, refined by observation, and woven into the very culture of their age. This wasn't just science, it was a way of life, a dialogue between earth and sky that shaped everything from farming to faith. What's truly remarkable is how much they understood without telescopes or satellites. They mapped the stars with nothing but their eyes and simple instruments, decoding patterns that told them when to plant crops, when to celebrate holy days, and even when eclipses would darken the sun. Their legacy isn't just a footnote in history, it's a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that curiosity and observation can unlock the secrets of the universe. So let's step into their world where time wasn't measured in minutes but in moments, the rising of a star, the shadow of a sundial, the hush of night giving way to dawn. By the time we're done, you'll never look at the sky the same way again. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world still lay shrouded in darkness, monks would rise from their beds and gather in candlelit chapels, their voices rising in prayer as they marked the first of the day's canonical hours, matins. This wasn't just a spiritual ritual, it was a precise act of timekeeping, guided by the stars and the slow turning of the heavens. Monasteries became the beating heart of medieval time measurement, where the rhythms of prayer and labor were dictated by the sun's journey and the moon's phases. For these communities, time wasn't a commodity to be spent but a sacred cycle to be observed, a divine order reflected in the movements of the cosmos. The church's influence stretched far beyond the monastery walls. Cathedrals with their towering spires often doubled as astronomical observatories. Architects designed windows and alignment markers to catch the sun's rays at specific angles, turning entire buildings into giant sundials. Imagine standing in a cathedral at noon on the winter solstice, watching as a single beam of light illuminated a carved symbol on the far wall, a silent, celestial announcement that the darkest day of the year had arrived. These weren't just architectural flourishes, they were functional tools blending art, faith, and science into a single purpose. But how did monks and scholars achieve such precision without modern instruments? They relied on a mix of inherited knowledge and relentless observation. Ancient texts like those of the Roman scholar Bede provided foundational understanding, while nightly vigils under the stars honed their skills. They tracked the positions of key constellations, noted the shifting length of shadows, and even used simple devices like astrolabes to measure the angles of celestial bodies. Over time, these practices grew so refined that monasteries could predict eclipses or adjust their calendars to keep Easter aligned with the spring equinox, a feat requiring astonishing astronomical insight. This marriage of faith and science didn't just serve the church, it shaped society itself. Farmers scheduled planting and harvests by monastic bells. Travelers used cathedral clocks to coordinate journeys, and entire towns regulated their lives by the calls to prayer. The heavens were more than a clock, they were a shared language, a way of binding communities together under the same cosmic rhythm. And as we'll soon see, the tools they crafted to read that rhythm were as ingenious as they were beautiful, turning everyday objects into gateways to the stars. Imagine holding in your hands a disc of brass no larger than a dinner plate, etched with intricate patterns that seemed to chart the very heavens themselves. This was the Astrolabe, a medieval masterpiece of engineering that functioned like an ancient smartphone, packed with layers of rotating dials and finely engraved coordinates. To the scholars and navigators of the Middle Ages, it wasn't just a tool, it was a window into the cosmos, capable of answering questions that would take modern technology pages of calculations to solve. With it, you could tell time by the stars, predict when the sun would rise, or even determine your latitude while standing on the deck of a swaying ship. The design was as elegant as it was ingenious. A central disc called the mater held a series of interchangeable plates, each tailored to a specific latitude. Over this, the reter, a delicate web of pointers shaped like star constellations, rotated to mimic the night sky's movement. By aligning the reter with the position of a known star, like Polaris, the user could read the time from engraved hour lines along the edge. But its uses didn't stop there. Turn it toward the sun, and the astrolabe could measure its height in the sky, helping farmers track the growing season or monks determine the exact moment for prayer. It was a calculator, a map, and an observatory all folded into one handheld device. What's truly fascinating is how widely these instruments were used, and not just by elite scholars. Geoffrey Chaucer, better known for his Canterbury Tales, actually wrote a step-by-step guide for his young son on how to operate an astrolabe, proving its reach into everyday education. Even sailors, far from the quiet halls of monasteries, relied on simplified versions called mariners' astrolabes to navigate open waters. Without GPS or even accurate maps, these devices were lifelines, turning the chaos of the sea into something measurable, something knowable. Yet for all its sophistication, the astrolabe had limits. It required clear skies, a steady hand, and a deep understanding of the celestial patterns it depicted. That's where its companion tool, the quadrant, stepped in. Smaller, simpler, and often more portable, the quadrant could perform many of the same calculations with just a weighted string and a graduated arc. While the astrolabe was the scholar's instrument, the quadrant became the traveler's proof that medieval innovation wasn't just about complexity, but adaptability. Together, these tools didn't just tell time, they connected people to the universe in a way that few modern devices ever could. While the astrolabe dazzled with its intricate layers of brass and star maps, the quadrant proved that brilliance often lies in simplicity. Picture a quarter circle of wood or metal, marked with careful gradations along its curved edge, and a weighted string dangling from its apex. Held up to the eye, this unassuming device could measure the angle of the sun above the horizon or pinpoint a star's position. No gears, no rotating plates, just pure geometry in motion. What it lacked in complexity, it made up for in versatility. A merchant on the Silk Road might use it to gauge the time before sunset, while a builder in Chartres could calculate the height of a cathedral spire by sighting its top through the quadrant's simple sights. The secret to its power was in its adaptability. Unlike the astrolabe, which required swapping plates for different latitudes, the quadrant needed only a steady hand and a clear line of sight. Sailors favored its rugged simplicity during long voyages, where damp air and rocking waves made delicate instruments useless. even farmers with no formal training could employ basic versions to track the sun's seasonal shifts, ensuring crops were sown at the optimal moment. This wasn't just a scholar's tool, it was democracy in action, putting cosmic knowledge within reach of anyone willing to learn its language. Over time, the quadrant evolved to meet ever more specialized needs. The quadrant's vetus, or Old Quadrant, featured a shadow square for measuring building heights, while the quadrant's novus incorporated movable components for astrological predictions. Some even included calendars or conversion tables, transforming them into pocket encyclopedias of practical knowledge. Yet no matter the variation, the principle remained the same. By aligning celestial bodies with the horizon, humans could extract order from the vastness of the sky. What's often overlooked is how these instruments bridged cultures. Islamic astronomers refined the quadrant's design, adding trigonometric scales that spread to Europe through translated texts. Jewish scholars in Spain used them to determine prayer times, while Christian monks adapted them for liturgical calendars. In a world without borders, the quadrant became a universal translator, decoding the heavens for every civilization that gazed upward. Underlying all this was a profound understanding of celestial mechanics, knowledge so precise it could predict eclipses or correct calendar errors accumulated over centuries. When we look at a quadrant today, we're not just seeing a tool, we're witnessing the culmination of millennia of observation, where every etched line represents countless nights spent under the stars. And as we'll soon discover, this hard-won wisdom didn't just measure time, it shaped the very rhythm of medieval life, from the crowing of roosters at dawn to the ringing of bells at vespers. Long before telescopes or computer models, medieval scholars gazed at the night sky and saw something extraordinary, a celestial highway where the sun, moon, and planets traveled against a backdrop of 12 constellations. This path, known as the Ecliptic, wasn't just a pretty arrangement of stars. It was the medieval world's grand calendar, a cosmic clock face marking the passage of seasons with uncanny precision. Picture a farmer in 14th century France, squinting at the horizon where the sun had just set beside the constellation Leo. That single observation told him summer's peak was fading, and the harvest moon would soon rise over Virgo. The Zodiac's constellations served as mile markers along this heavenly road. As Earth orbited the sun, our perspective shifted, making it appear as though the sun moved through each constellation in turn, Aries giving way to Taurus, then Gemini, and so on. Monks meticulously recorded these transitions in illuminated manuscripts, noting how the sun's position at the spring equinox aligned with Pisces, signaling Lent's arrival, while its entry into Cancer marked the longest day of the year. These weren't abstract observations. They dictated when to plant wheat, when to prune vineyards, even when to collect taxes, which often fell due after the autumn equinox when crops were gathered. But the zodiac's power went beyond agriculture. Astrologers, many of whom were also respected astronomers, mapped planetary movements along this same path, believing Jupiter's presence in Sagittarius might herald fortunate journeys or Saturn's slow march through Scorpion portend hardship. Universities like Bologna and Paris taught students to calculate these alignments using volvels, rotating paper discs that simulated celestial motions. A merchant planning a sea voyage might consult such charts to avoid launching during a Mars-Mercury opposition, thought to stir treacherous winds. What's often forgotten is how accurately these medieval models predicted eclipses and planetary conjunctions. By tracking the moon's nodes, the 2 points where its orbit crossed, the ecliptic scholars could anticipate lunar eclipses years in advance. The Venerable Bede's 8th century writings describe these methods with such clarity that modern astronomers still marvel at their precision. And when Halley's comet blazed across European skies in 1066, Anglo-Saxon chroniclers didn't panic. They recorded its path against the zodiac with clinical detachment, recognizing it as part of nature's orderly progression. This fusion of science and symbolism reached its peak in medieval calendar design. The magnificent Zodiac Man illustrations in health manuscripts showed each body part governed by a constellation, Aries ruling the head, Pisces the feet, guiding physicians on when to bleed or administer remedies. Cathedral labyrinths, like the one at Chartres, encoded the ecliptic's curvature in their winding paths, turning sacred architecture into a three-dimensional star map. Even the humble farmer's almanac, scribbled on cheap parchment, tied planting cycles to the moon's position in fertile Taurus rather than barren Aquarius. Yet for all its mysticism, the system worked. When Charlemagne standardized feast days across his empire, he didn't rely on arbitrary dates but anchored them to solar and lunar events calculated via zodiacal tables. A Benedictine monk in Normandy could thus know that Pentecost fell 50 days after Easter, which itself was set as the first Sunday after the full moon following the spring equinox, a rule established at the Council of Nicaea using precisely this celestial knowledge. The sky wasn't just a clock, it was the parchment on which medieval society wrote its very rhythm of life. The Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar over 1500 years earlier, was still the heartbeat of medieval timekeeping, but it had a problem. Every year, it slipped out of sync with the actual solar year by about 11 minutes, a tiny drift that added up to days over centuries. By the 1300s, spring equinoxes were arriving nearly a week earlier than calendar dates suggested, throwing holy days like Easter into confusion. Yet monks didn't just accept this growing gap, they wrestled with it using tools we'd barely recognize as timekeeping devices today, their secret weapon. The computus, a labyrinth of calculations scribbled in the margins of manuscripts, where lunar phases and solar cycles collided in a dance of numbers and faith. Take the Chronicon of Regino of Prum, written in the 9th century. Between prayers and copying scripture, this Benedictine abbot filled pages with tables predicting Easter dates decades in advance, accounting for the moon's 19-year metonic cycle. His work wasn't just math, it was an act of devotion, ensuring the holiest feast aligned with the same spring full moon that may have shone over Jerusalem during Christ's resurrection. And he wasn't alone. Across Europe, monasteries became living calculators where monks tracked golden numbers and epochs codes for lunar-solar harmony with the precision of modern astronomers. The beauty of these calendars lay in their duality. Open a medieval psalter, and you might find a page where zodiac symbols twine around saints' feast days, or a blood-red rubric marking the claves terminorum, keys to calculating movable feasts. These weren't dry records but vibrant artworks where celestial dragons devoured the sun to symbolize eclipses, and miniature paintings of farmers' sowing fields served as visual reminders of seasonal duties. The Ramsey Abbey computus, for instance, paired its dense numerical tables with illustrations of the labors of the month, tying abstract calculations to the tangible rhythms of plowing and harvest. Yet for all their elegance, these systems had limits. Without the Gregorian reforms, leap year adjustments, even the most meticulous computers couldn't stop the creeping drift of dates. That's where sundials stepped in as nature's corrective. Mounted on monastery walls or carved into portable ivory diptychs, these shadow clocks offered real-time feedback. A monk checking the dial at noon might discover the sun now reached its zenith 3 finger widths left of the calendar's prediction, a silent nudge that the Julian year needed recalibration. What's striking is how these tools complemented each other. The calendar provided the framework, the computus the fine-tuning, and the sundial the daily reality check. Together, they formed a web of timekeeping so robust that when Gregory's reformers finally addressed the drift in 1582, they built upon centuries of medieval observation. Those primitive monks, it turns out, had been doing rocket science with quills and parchment all along. Sundials transformed something as ordinary as a shadow into a precise measure of time, proving that medieval ingenuity often lay in working with nature rather than against it. Picture a stone pillar in a monastery garden, its triangular gnomon casting a sharp black line across curved hour marks etched into the ground. At dawn, the shadow stretched long toward the west. By midday, it shrank to a mere sliver pointing due north. These weren't just crude approximations. Monks knew the sun's arc changed with the seasons, so they carefully angled the gnomon to match their latitude and carved additional curves to account for winter's low sun versus summer's high path. A well-designed sundial could pinpoint the hour within minutes, making it the most reliable clock available for centuries. But sundials weren't confined to grand courtyards. Travelers carried pocket-sized versions like the diptych dial, a hinged wooden or ivory rectangle that opened like a book. Inside, a string gnomon stretched between the covers, casting a shadow across a grid of hour lines calibrated for different latitudes. A merchant crossing the Alps could adjust it for the steep terrain, while a pilgrim en route to Santiago de Compostela might note the time for evening prayers. Some even included compasses to align with magnetic north, a feature borrowed from Chinese navigational tools that trickled west along trade routes. These portable marvels were the medieval equivalent of a smartwatch, compact yet packed with celestial wisdom. What's often overlooked is how deeply medieval people understood the sun's quirks. They knew the equation of time, the fact that solar days vary slightly in length due to Earth's elliptical orbit, long before telescopes revealed the mechanics behind it. Cathedral builders exploited this knowledge, designing south-facing rose windows with traceries that acted as giant sundials. At Lincoln Cathedral, a noon mark carved into the floor still catches a sliver of light at true solar midday, a silent correction to mechanical clocks that often ran fast or slow. This wasn't just precision, it was poetry in motion where light itself became the arbiter of time. Yet sundials had one unavoidable limitation: they demanded sunlight. As dusk fell, medieval timekeepers turned their gaze upward, where a far older clockwork awaited the stars. Unlike the sun's solitary path, the night sky offered a sprawling mosaic of timekeeping aids. The North Star, fixed like a pivot in the heavens, anchored celestial navigation, while constellations wheeled around it in predictable rhythms. Farmers knew that when Orion's belt appeared at midnight, autumn frosts were near. Sailors steered by the slow tilt of Ursa Major's ladle to gauge the hour. This was timekeeping stripped to its essence: no gears, no shadows, just the silent, eternal dance of stars overhead. The shift from sun to stars wasn't merely practical. It reflected a medieval worldview where time flowed in cycles, not straight lines. Sundials marked the fleeting present, while the stars whispered of seasons and centuries. Together, they wove a seamless tapestry of moments and millennia, proving that even without a single mechanical tick, the medieval world kept time with breathtaking grace. Polaris, the unwavering sentinel of the northern sky, was more than just a navigational aid. It was the medieval world's celestial anchor. Sailors on the pitch-black waters of the North Sea would stretch their arms toward this fixed point, aligning their course as reliably as any compass. But its utility went far beyond direction. By measuring the angle between Polaris and the horizon with nothing but a fist at arm's length, a technique called fist measuring, a traveler could estimate both latitude and the hour of the night. 5 fists high meant midnight in winter. 3 fists signaled the approach of dawn. This wasn't guesswork, it was geometry written in starlight. farmers too kept time by the heavens. The Big Dipper's slow rotation around Polaris served as a giant celestial clock hand. When its bowl pointed downward in autumn evenings, it was time to sow winter wheat. By spring, its upward tilt mirrored the rising sap in maple trees. Monks in scriptoriums painstakingly copied star charts like those in the Aratia manuscripts, where constellations were inked in gold beside poetic descriptions of their seasonal appearances. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were practical almanacs. A physician consulting a Zodiac-themed medical text might schedule bloodletting for when the moon was in Aries, believing it reduced bleeding, a practice rooted in classical tradition but refined by medieval observation. The stars also guided the rhythms of daily life. The Revelatio Esdri, a popular text in medieval monasteries, divided the night into 12 stellar hours, each marked by the rising of specific constellations. As Orion's belt cleared the eastern horizon, shepherds knew it was time to return flocks to fold. In maritime communities, the appearance of the Pleiades at dusk signaled the start of herring season, while its disappearance in spring warned of turbulent North Atlantic storms. This intimate knowledge of the night sky wasn't reserved for scholars. It was woven into folk songs, painted on church ceilings, and passed down through generations like a celestial inheritance. But the moon, with its ever-changing face, added another layer of complexity to this starry timekeeping. Unlike the sun's steady march or the stars' predictable cycles, the moon danced to its own rhythm, a rhythm that medieval people learned to read with astonishing nuance. The moon's silver face didn't just light the medieval night, it carved time itself into neat 29.5-day parcels. Farmers watched its waxing and waning like a celestial almanac, planting root crops during the dark phase when sap was believed to retreat into the earth, and sowing grains as the crescent grew, trusting its pull on moisture to nurture seeds. In vineyard regions, monks pruned vines under a waning moon, convinced it lessened bleeding in the cuts, while fishermen timed their nets to the tides stirred by lunar gravity. This wasn't folklore, it was hard-won wisdom, refined over generations of watching how the moon's rhythm swayed everything from ocean currents to the germination of barley. Religious life pulsed to this lunar beat. The date of Easter, Christianity's most important feast, hinged on a precise formula: the first Sunday after the first full moon following the spring equinox. Monasteries kept lunaria parchment strips inked with phase diagrams to track these cycles. A mistake could mean fasting during harvest or celebrating resurrection while snow still blanketed the fields. Some manuscripts, like the 12th century Computus Runicus, even encoded lunar data into cryptic runes, allowing quick calculations without lengthy tables. But the moon's role extended beyond the church. Islamic communities relied on its crescent to mark Ramadan's start, while Jewish Passover aligned with the full moon of Nisan, creating a tapestry of holy days woven from shared celestial threads. Eclipses, though, split medieval perspectives. To some, a blood-red lunar eclipse was a divine portent, a warning of plague or war. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records panicked during the eclipse of 1114, when the moon turned to blood, just as a rebellion erupted. Yet in quiet scriptoriums, scholars like Gerbert of Aurillac, later Pope Sylvester Roman II, sketched the shadow's curvature, realizing Earth's roundness cast it. Their predictions grew so accurate that by the 13th century, astronomers could foretell eclipses to within hours, proving the cosmos followed rules, not whims. Yet for all its reliability, the moon had a fatal flaw for timekeepers: clouds. In regions like Ireland or the Baltic, where overcast skies might obscure the moon for weeks, people turned to cruder but more dependable methods. Candle clocks marked with rings of wax burned through the night at predictable rates. Water clocks, though fussy in freezing winters, dripped steadily regardless of weather. And in the permanent twilight of Scandinavian winters, where neither sun nor moon might appear for months, people listened for the natmål, the night measure, counting intervals by how long it took to recite certain psalms or epic poems. These adaptations reveal medieval timekeeping's brilliance. When one celestial clock failed, they simply built another from whatever materials lay at hand, be it wax, water, or words. It wasn't about precision by modern standards, but about persistence, about refusing to let the darkness swallow time whole. And as we'll see next, this ingenuity didn't just mark hours, it reshaped entire landscapes, from the alignment of castles to the very stones of cathedrals. In the misty valleys of Ireland or the fog-bound coasts of Norway, where weeks might pass without a clear view of sun or stars, medieval timekeepers faced a unique challenge: how to mark the hours when the heavens themselves were hidden. Their solution lay in turning everyday objects into clocks, proving that necessity truly is the mother of invention. Take the humble candle monks would carefully carve notches at intervals along its length, each mark representing a fixed period like the canonical hours. As the wax burned down past the first notch, it signaled prime, the first prayer of the day. By the third notch, the community gathered for terce. Some monasteries even used candles with embedded nails. When the wax melted enough, the nail would clatter into a metal tray below, creating an audible alarm to rouse sleeping clerics for nighttime vigils. Water clocks, though far less common due to their complexity, demonstrated even greater ingenuity. The clepsydra, as they were called, worked by allowing water to drip at a controlled rate from one chamber to another, with markings showing the passage of hours. A 9th century example from the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland used a floating indicator that rose as the lower chamber filled, its movement tracked against a scale carved into the device's side. These weren't just crude timers, some incorporated gears and dials, foreshadowing the mechanical clocks that would emerge centuries later. But water clocks had their drawbacks. In freezing winters, the water turned to ice, and in dry summers, evaporation could skew the measurements. What's remarkable is how these adaptations varied by region. In the perpetual twilight of Scandinavian winters, people relied on time candles made from whale fat, which burned slower and brighter than beeswax. Meanwhile, coastal communities from Brittany to Cornwall used tidal clocks, memorizing how the sea's ebb and flow correlated with lunar phases. A fisherman in Cornwall might know that low tide at the new moon always came when the Big Dipper's handle pointed westward, a lesson passed down through generations without a single written record. Yet for all their creativity, these methods paled in precision compared to the celestial timekeeping of sunnier lands. That's where Islamic scholars entered the story, bringing with them innovations that would revolutionize how Europe measured time. While northern monks counted candle notches, astronomers in places like Cordoba and Baghdad were refining astrolabes with trigonometric scales and crafting water clocks that chimed automatically, technologies that would soon cross the Mediterranean and change the course of timekeeping forever. While European monks were tracking the moon's phases for Easter calculations, a revolution in celestial knowledge was unfolding under the clear desert skies of the Islamic world. In observatories from Baghdad to Damascus, scholars like al-Battani were achieving breakthroughs that would redefine medieval astronomy. His precise measurements of the solar year, correcting Ptolemy's errors by a staggering 24 minutes, became the gold standard for European calendars centuries later. But this wasn't just about numbers, it was about tools. Islamic craftsmen transformed the astrolabe from a clunky Greek prototype into a precision instrument, adding features like the universal plate, which allowed users to calculate time for any latitude without swapping components. Suddenly, a single device could guide a traveler from Cordoba to Constantinople. The real magic happened in translation. In 12th century Toledo, a team of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars worked side by side in a frenzy of intellectual exchange, rendering Arabic star catalogues and trigonometric tables into Latin. One manuscript, the Toledo Tables, bundled centuries of Islamic observations into a single reference work, complete with instructions for predicting eclipses and adjusting for leap years. These weren't dry academic exercises, they were lifelines for European science. When the English monk Roger Bacon cited Al-Zarqali's refinements to planetary models in his own writings, he wasn't just name-dropping, he was building a bridge between worlds. What's often forgotten is how practical this knowledge was. Islamic astronomers didn't just chart the stars for theoretical glory, they solved everyday problems. The Kitab al-Amwar of al-Asma'i detailed how to use celestial cues for seasonal farming, while Ibn Yunus' Hakmite tables helped Egyptian judges determine prayer times to the minute. When these techniques reached Europe through Sicilian translators, they didn't stay locked in monasteries, they filtered into market squares. Venetian merchants adopted Arabic navigational tricks to time their voyages, while French architects used Qibla indicators to align churches with solstice sunrises. This cross-pollination reshaped timekeeping's very texture. Before Arabic numerals arrived, monks struggled with clumsy Roman numerals to calculate Easter dates. After they could perform complex equations in fractions of the time, the Astrolabe's quadrant, perfected by Islamic mathematicians, became the medieval equivalent of a pocket calculator, so ubiquitous that Chaucer included it in his Canterbury Tales as essential education for his son. Even the word zenith comes straight from Arabic Samt ar-Raz, meaning path above the head. Yet the most enduring legacy wasn't in tools or terms, but in mindset. Islamic astronomy taught Europe to see the heavens as a measurable, orderly system, not a realm of omens, but a clockwork universe. When Richard of Wallingford designed Europe's first mechanical clock in the 14th century, its gears mirrored the epicycles of Persian star charts. The pendulum of progress had swung, and time itself would never tick the same way again. As these innovations seeped into daily life, they did more than tell hours, they rewrote society's rhythm. From the ringing of church bells calibrated to Arabic prayer schedules, to the Reeves Court meeting at astronomical noon, determined by sundials with Arabic numerals, the invisible hand of Islamic science quietly reset medieval Europe's internal clock. And as we'll see next, that transformation didn't just change how people measured time, it changed how they lived it. In the rolling fields of medieval Europe, time wasn't measured in hours, but in actions: the slant of sunlight across furrows, the height of cornstalks at midsummer, the first frost crisping the vines. A farmer waking at dawn didn't need a clock to know when to sow barley. He watched the Pleiades fade into the morning sky, a celestial signal passed down from his grandfather's grandfather. This was timekeeping written into the land itself, where the sun's arc determined when to sharpen scythes or drive sheep to higher pastures. Communities didn't just follow these rhythms, they lived by them, their very survival hinging on reading the heavens with the same care as a scribe decoding a sacred text. But time's grip tightened as villages grew into towns. By the 13th century, the rhythmic clang of church bells began slicing days into measurable chunks: prime at sunrise for market openings, nuns at midday when laborers paused to eat, vespers as shadows lengthened and shop shutters closed. These weren't arbitrary divisions, they mirrored the ancient canonical hours of monastic life, now adapted for bustling guild halls and merchant stalls. In places like Bruges or York, the bell tower became the heartbeat of civic life, its chimes synchronizing everything from cloth dyers' lunch breaks to the start of curfew, when gates clanged shut and watchmen took their posts. Yet even as mechanical clocks began appearing in town squares, Their gears often had to be reset by the sun's position, proof that celestial time still ruled. Festivals wove these practical rhythms into something richer, blending cosmic events with cultural memory. May Day, timed to the halfway point between spring equinox and summer solstice, saw villages crown floral queens and dance around phallic maypoles, traditions with roots in pagan fertility rites, now thinly veiled as Christian celebrations. The winter solstice, repurposed as Christmas, kept its ancient focus on light and rebirth with Yule logs and candlelit processions. Even the timing of fairs followed astronomical logic. The great champagne markets opened not on a fixed date but 15 days after the feast of St. John, itself pegged to the summer solstice. This wasn't superstition. It was savvy scheduling, aligning commerce with the seasons when travelers could safely cross mountain passes or seas. What's often overlooked is how deeply class shaped time's experience. A nobleman hunting in his forest might measure the day by the flight of herons or the changing angle of his sundial, while his serfs marked it by the ache in their backs after threshing grain under the same sun. In monasteries, the rich could afford elaborate water clocks to wake them for nighttime prayers, while peasants relied on roosters or the milky glow of Orion rising. Yet despite these divides, everyone from king to commoner shared one unshakable truth: time was never truly theirs to control. A cloudy week could blur the boundaries between sext and nun, a delayed harvest moon might push back rent payments, and an eclipse that could send an entire kingdom into panicked prayer. This delicate dance between human schedules and celestial inevitability set the stage for our next chapter, where we'll separate medieval astronomy's startling accuracy from the myths that still cling to it like stubborn starlight. Because for every genuine eclipse prediction or navigational breakthrough, there were a dozen tall tales about comets heralding doom or planets influencing personalities. The truth, as we'll see, is far more fascinating than the fiction. The idea that medieval scholars believed in a flat Earth is one of history's most stubborn misconceptions, a myth that says more about modern arrogance than medieval ignorance. The truth, every educated person from the time of Charlemagne to Columbus knew the Earth was spherical. Bede, the 8th century English monk whose writings became Europe's standard science textbooks, described the planet as round like a ball, and even used its curvature to explain why different regions experienced daylight at different times. When artists depicted Christ holding a globus cruciger, a sphere topped with a cross, they weren't being symbolic, they were echoing common knowledge. The real flat Earth nonsense didn't emerge until the 19th century, when anti-religious writers rewrote history to paint the Middle Ages as a backward era. Astrology and astronomy, though intertwined, were never the same discipline. Think of them as cousins sharing a family resemblance but speaking different languages. Astronomers like Richard of Wallingford, who built the groundbreaking St. Albans clock in the 14th century, cared about precise celestial mechanics, tracking planetary orbits to predict eclipses or refining calendar systems. Astrologers, meanwhile, focused on how those movements might influence human affairs. Universities taught both, but with clear boundaries. Oxford's curriculum listed astronomy under mathematics, while astrology fell under medicine. A scholar might cast horoscopes to diagnose illness, believing Jupiter's alignment could affect bodily humors, while simultaneously using the same star charts to calculate the exact date of the next solar eclipse. The heroes of medieval astronomy weren't lone geniuses but collaborators across cultures. Take Gerbert of Aurillac, the 10th century French monk who studied in Islamic Spain and brought back the astrolabe, revolutionizing European timekeeping. Or Hildegard of Bingen, whose visionary writings on cosmology blended theology with acute observations of planetary motion. Then there's Levi ben Gershon, a Jewish scholar in Provence who invented the Jacob's staff, a navigational tool so accurate it remained in use for centuries. These figures didn't work in isolation. They built on Greek, Arabic, and Indian knowledge, proving science has always been a global conversation. What's often overlooked is how practical their work was. When the Venerable Bede calculated the tides at Lindisfarne, or when Alfonso X of Castile commissioned the Alphonsine tables to standardize celestial data, they weren't just satisfying curiosity, they were solving real problems. Sailors needed accurate tide predictions to avoid shipwrecks, farmers required solstice markers to time plantings, and the church demanded precise Easter dates to unify Christendom. The night sky wasn't just a subject of study, it was the medieval equivalent of GPS calendar and weather forecast rolled into one. The real marvel isn't that they got some things wrong, it's how much they got right with nothing but naked eyes and relentless curiosity. When we dismiss medieval astronomy as primitive, we erase centuries of painstaking observation that laid the groundwork for Copernicus, Kepler, and the scientific revolution. Their legacy isn't in the myths we've invented about them, but in the stars they mapped, the clocks they built, and the timeless truth that understanding the heavens begins with looking up. Bede, the Northumbrian monk whose quill scratched across parchment in the quiet of an 8th century monastery, might not strike us as a revolutionary, but his calculations quietly reshaped how medieval Europe understood time. His De Temporum Ration on the reckoning of time didn't just explain how to calculate Easter, it wove together astronomy, mathematics, and theology into a seamless whole. When he described the Earth as a sphere floating in space, or detailed the moon's influence on tides, he wasn't copying ancient texts blindly. He was testing theories against his own observations, like noting how the timing of tides shifted with the lunar cycle at his coastal monastery. This was science in action, grounded in the rhythms of daily life. 4 centuries later, another scholar's work would become the medieval equivalent of a bestseller. Johannes de Sacrobosco's De Sphera, written in Paris around 1230, took Ptolemy's complex theories and made them accessible to students, with vivid metaphors comparing the universe to an onion's layered skins and painstaking explanations of eclipses. Sacrobosco's textbook became the foundation of university astronomy courses from Oxford to Bologna. But what set it apart wasn't just clarity, it was his willingness to question. When he pointed out inconsistencies in the Julian calendar's solar calculations, he wasn't merely preserving ancient knowledge, he was nudging Europe toward the reforms that would eventually birth the Gregorian calendar. These thinkers shared a common thread. They bridged worlds. Bede's computer's tables, for instance, blended Celtic, Roman, and Christian traditions into a unified system for dating Easter. Sacrobosco, though writing in Latin, drew heavily on Arabic star catalogues and Hindu Arabic numerals tools that had traveled thousands of miles to reach his desk. Their genius lay not in solitary brilliance but in synthesis. Like stonemasons carving a cathedral's arches, they took the raw materials of Greek, Islamic, and indigenous knowledge and shaped them into something new. Yet their legacy extended beyond parchment. Bede's calculations influenced when monasteries rang their bells, while Sacrobosco's celestial diagrams found their way into the stained glass windows of Gothic cathedrals, where sunlight tracing the path of a rose window could mark the solstice as precisely as any sundial. This wasn't just theoretical knowledge, it was architecture in dialogue with the cosmos. And as we'll see next, that conversation between stone and sky reached its zenith in the soaring vaults of medieval cathedrals, where every pillar and spire whispered secrets about time itself. Chartres Cathedral isn't just a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, it's a stone hymn to the cosmos, where every pillar and stained glass window whispers secrets of medieval astronomy. Stand in the nave at noon on the summer solstice, and you'll see sunlight pierce a tiny hole in the south transept, striking a single brass nail embedded in the floor. This precise alignment wasn't accidental. It was a celestial clock, marking the year's longest day with the same accuracy as a modern observatory. The cathedral's famous labyrinth, winding across the floor in a pattern echoing the sun's path through the Zodiac, may have served as a walking calendar, pilgrims tracing its turns like monks counting prayers on a rosary. Even the blue of its windows, infused with cobalt to mimic the vault of heaven, transformed sunlight into constellations that shifted with the seasons. This marriage of faith and science wasn't unique to charters. Across Europe, churches doubled as astronomical instruments. Durham Cathedral's Galilee Chapel aligns perfectly with the rising sun on Candlemas, flooding the altar with light to commemorate the purification of Mary. At St. Denis in Paris, Abbot Suger designed the choir to capture the equinox sunrise, bathing the relics of saints in golden light, as if heaven itself were blessing them. These weren't just pretty effects, they were theological statements, proof that divine order mirrored celestial mechanics. A bishop checking the solstice beam's position wasn't just marking time, he was confirming God's covenant with creation, written in the language of light and shadow. Yet this knowledge didn't stay locked behind stained glass. The same celestial principles that guided cathedral builders soon steered ships across uncharted oceans. As Europe's age of exploration dawned, navigators realized the stars that aligned church altars could also plot courses to new worlds. The North Star, fixed above Chartres' spire, became a sailor's compass. Solar declination tables, once used to position cathedral foundations, now filled the pages of maritime almanacs. Even the astrolabe, perfected in monastic workshops, found new life on the decks of caravels, where Portuguese explorers used it to measure the sun's height and guess their latitude. What began as sacred geometry had become the key to global empire, proof that medieval timekeeping wasn't just about counting hours, but about mapping humanity's place in the universe. And as we'll see next, that quest would push celestial navigation to its limits, where a single misread star could mean the difference between discovery and disaster. Navigating the open ocean in the 15th century wasn't just about courage, it was about celestial math. Picture a Portuguese caravel pitching on Atlantic swells, its crew squinting at a simplified version of the astrolabe called the mariner's astrolabe. Unlike its elaborate monastic cousin, this brass ring was built for rough seas, with weighted bottoms to stay vertical despite the ship's rolling. By aligning its sighting mechanism with the noonday sun, a navigator could measure the solar angle above the horizon, converting that number into latitude using tables painstakingly compiled by Prince Henry the Navigator's scholars. A single calculation might place the ship somewhere along a line stretching hundreds of miles, crude by today's GPS standards, but revolutionary for sailors who'd previously hugged coasts to avoid getting hopelessly lost. Henry's navigation school at Sagres wasn't just a think tank, it was a melting pot of medieval ingenuity. Arab cartographers shared star charts showing Polaris's position beyond the Mediterranean. Jewish astronomers contributed trigonometric methods for refining celestial measurements, and Italian shipwrights adapted vessel designs to carry these fragile instruments safely. The result, a toolkit that let explorers like Vasco da Gama leapfrog down Africa's coast by running the latitudes, sailing due south or north until they hit a target parallel, then turning east or west. When Columbus set sail in 1492, his logbook overflowed with lunar distance calculations borrowed from these very techniques, though his notorious miscalculation of Earth size based on flawed medieval Arabic leagues famously led him to the Caribbean instead of Asia. Yet these voyages rested on centuries of quieter breakthroughs. The Regimento do Astrolabe e do Quadrante, a Portuguese manual from around 1500, distilled generations of monastic astronomy into step-by-step instructions for sailors with no formal education. Rhyming Portuguese verses helped crews memorize star patterns. When the guards of Ursa Minor point west at dusk/autumn gales will blow, so reef sails or risk husk. Even the humble sandglass, often dismissed as a simple timer, became critical when paired with celestial navigation. By comparing the hourglass's flow with the shift of certain stars, navigators could estimate longitude crudely, but enough to cross oceans. What's often forgotten is how these tools reshaped human ambition. Before mariners could trust the stars, myths warned of sea monsters lurking beyond the horizon. But armed with astrolabes and lunar tables, explorers transformed the unknown into waypoints on a map. The same North Star that guided Benedictine monks through winter vigils now steered caravels to the Spice Islands, proving medieval timekeeping wasn't just about measuring hours, it was about conquering distance. And as sails gave way to gears, that relentless pursuit of precision would tick into a new era, where metal escapements replaced celestial bodies as humanity's master clockmakers. The clanking gears of the Wells Cathedral clock, installed around 1392, didn't just tell time, they announced a revolution. For the first time in history, the steady pulse of escapements and weights began drowning out the silent rhythm of the stars. Yet even as these mechanical marvels took over town squares, their faces still gleamed with celestial homage, golden suns tracing orbits, moon phases waxing and waning in miniature, zodiac wheels turning as if the heavens themselves were cogs in the machine. This wasn't just progress, it was a reluctant compromise between tradition and innovation, where medieval engineers paid tribute to the very skies their inventions were rendering obsolete. But something profound slipped away when we traded starlight for springs. Gone was the intimate knowledge that connected a farmer's planting schedule to the Pleiades' rise, or the way a sailor could gauge midnight by the tilt of Ursa Major's ladle. Mechanical clocks abstracted time, divorcing it from the natural world and locking it behind church towers or wealthy merchants' walls. Suddenly, the communal experience of reading shadows or stars gave way to a private relationship with the hour, a shift that would eventually lead to factory whistles and punch clocks, where time became something to be spent, not observed. The irony, these early clocks were far less accurate than the celestial methods they replaced. A well-maintained sundial could pinpoint noon within minutes, while 14th century mechanical clocks might lose or gain an hour each day. What they lacked in precision, though, they made up for in control. No longer at the mercy of clouds or seasons, humans could now impose their own order on time, slicing days into uniform hours for markets, prayers, or labor. The night, once measured by the slow wheel of constellations, became just another span of countable minutes, yet traces of the old ways lingered in unexpected places. Church bells continued to ring at canonical hours tied to daylight, not clock faces. Farmers still planted by moon phases long after city dwellers ignored them. And in remote monasteries, monks kept double ledgers officially following the new mechanical hours, while quietly noting the sun's position for their ancient rituals. The cosmos hadn't changed, only our attention had. Perhaps the greatest loss was the sense of time as a conversation with nature. When medieval people tracked the solstice sunrise creeping along a cathedral floor or timed harvests by the dog star's first appearance, they weren't just measuring moments, they were participating in a cosmic dance. Our modern clocks, for all their atomic precision, can't replicate that awe. The Wells Cathedral clock's astronomical face, then, wasn't just decoration. It was a plea to remember that time isn't just something we count, but something we live breathing with the seasons, pulsing with the tides, and forever entwined with the turning of the stars. There's a quiet tragedy in how modern life has severed our connection to the sky, the same sky that once served as humanity's first clock, compass, and calendar. Walk through any city tonight, and you'll be lucky to spot more than a handful of stars through the orange glow of light pollution. The constellations that guided farmers, sailors, and monks for millennia are now drowned out by streetlights and smartphone screens. We've traded the slow, patient dance of celestial bodies for the relentless tick of digital seconds, and in doing so, we've lost something profound: the visceral, tactile relationship with time that shaped human culture for centuries. Think about the last time you felt truly aware of the passing hours, not because your phone buzzed with a reminder, but because you noticed the lengthening shadows of afternoon or the moon's silver crescent hanging low in the twilight. Our ancestors didn't just know the time, they felt it in their bones. A medieval farmer could sense the approach of harvest by the way the Pleiades clustered in the pre-dawn sky, just as a monk knew midnight had passed when the Big Dipper's handle pointed downward like a celestial hour hand. Today, we tell time without looking up, without touching anything, without even thinking. The Astrolabe's brass dials, worn smooth by generations of fingers, have been replaced by glass screens we swipe without a second thought. Yet traces of this ancient wisdom linger in surprising places. Our time zones, they're essentially a globalized version of solar noon, standardized for train schedules in the 19th century, but rooted in the sun's position. The Gregorian calendar, with its leap years and fixed months, still nods to the lunar cycles it tried to tame. Even the word noon comes from the Latin nona hora, the 9th hour after dawn in monastic timekeeping. These aren't just relics, they're proof that celestial rhythms are baked into the structures of modern life, whether we notice them or not. The good news: we don't have to abandon technology to reclaim this connection. Stargazing apps can overlay constellations on the night sky, helping urban dwellers rediscover the patterns their ancestors knew by heart. Simple sundial projects crafted from paper or wood reintroduce the pleasure of watching time unfold as a shadow's slow creep. And in places like Denmark's dark sky parks, communities are fighting light pollution to restore the primal wonder of a star-filled night. It's not about rejecting progress, it's about remembering that time wasn't always something to be conquered, but a rhythm to be lived. What if we took one evening to turn off the screens and step outside, letting the stars reset our internal clocks, or mark the solstice not with a calendar notification, but by noticing where the sun sets on the horizon? These small acts won't just reconnect us with history, they'll remind us that time, in its purest form, isn't a number on a screen. It's the turning of the earth, the arc of the sun, the slow and ancient pulse of the universe itself, still ticking patiently above the glow of our cities. Medieval timekeeping isn't just a relic of history, it's a living craft, reborn in the hands of modern hobbyists who find joy in tracking time the way their ancestors did. Picture a group of amateur astronomers gathering on a hilltop at dusk, not with telescopes but with handmade astrolabes, their brass surfaces gleaming in the fading light as they measure the altitude of Venus. Or a classroom of middle schoolers etching hour lines into clay sundials, their fingers tracing the same curves monks once carved into stone. These aren't just nostalgia projects, they're acts of rediscovery, bridging centuries with tools that demand patience, observation, and a willingness to slow down. What's striking is how accessible these ancient techniques have become. Apps like Stellarium now let anyone pull up the night sky as it appeared over Chartres in the year 1200, complete with constellations medieval scholars would have recognized. Online communities trade tips on forging quadrant replicas using period-correct methods, while YouTube tutorials walk beginners through calibrating sundials for their exact latitude. Even universities are getting in on the act. Oxford's History of Science Museum runs workshops where students learn to navigate by Polaris using only a knotted string and their outstretched hands, proving you don't need silicon chips to decode the cosmos. But beyond the practical skills, there's something deeper at work here, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of digital precision. Modern life runs on atomic clocks that count seconds with cold indifference, but a sundial forces you to notice the sun's path, the seasons shift, the way shadows stretch and shrink like living things. When you time your day by the moon's phase or a star's rising, you're not just measuring hours, you're syncing your rhythm with the natural world. It's no wonder mindfulness advocates have latched onto these practices, framing them as antidotes to the always-on rush of contemporary life. The philosophical implications ripple outward. Medieval timekeeping wasn't about efficiency, it was about meaning. A monk chanting Vespers as the evening star appeared wasn't just checking off a task, he was participating in a cosmic order that transcended human schedules. Today's revivalists often describe similar epiphanies, the shock of realizing how disconnected we've grown from the skies that once dictated every plowing and feast. Whether it's a historian crafting a parchment horoscope or a parent pointing out Orion's belt to their child, these small acts reclaim something vital: the awareness that time isn't just something we spend, but something we inhabit, as vast and mysterious as the stars themselves. For medieval minds, time didn't march forward in a straight line. It spiraled like the seasons, each turn familiar yet sacred. Imagine a farmer in Normandy who planted his fields not by dates on a parchment, but by the oak leaves unfurling to the size of a mouse's ear, or a midwife who knew labor would quicken when the moon swelled full. This wasn't superstition, it was a deep trust in nature's repetitions, a belief that the cosmos moved in divinely ordained cycles, mirrored in everything from the tides to the turning of saints' feast days. While modern life races toward deadlines, medieval lives pulsed with the rhythm of sprouting seeds and migrating geese, where even the church's liturgical calendar echoed the eternal return of Advent, Lent, and Easter. This cyclical world, you left little room for our modern obsession with wasting time. A Benedictine monk rising for nocturnal prayers didn't grumble about lost sleep. He saw his vigils as threads in a tapestry woven by generations before him, each chant and psalm another stitch in a pattern stretching back to creation. When harvests failed or plagues struck, people interpreted these not as random tragedies but as part of a larger, knowable order. The Zodiac's wheel, the moon's phases, even the predictable return of comets like Halley's in 1066, all reinforced the idea that time was a circle, not an arrow. Yet this perspective didn't vanish with the Renaissance. It seeped into the cracks of modernity in unexpected ways. Farmers in the Alps still plant by lunar phases, winemakers time fermentations with equinoxes, and astronomers trace comet orbits using algorithms derived from medieval ephemerides. The Gregorian calendar, for all its precision, still bends to the solar year cycle, and Easter's wandering date preserves the ancient link between equinox and full moon. Even our language betrays this legacy. Phrases like full circle or cycle of life whisper of an older understanding we've never fully shaken. The real shift came not with clocks but with capitalism's rise, when factory whistles replaced church bells and time became a commodity to be bought and sold. Yet traces of the medieval mindset linger wherever we pause to watch fireflies winking in synchrony or marvel at the predictability of the Perseid meteor shower, reminders that beneath our digital efficiency, the cosmos still turns at its own patient pace. The question isn't whether this knowledge survived, but whether we've forgotten how to listen. In the flickering candlelight of a medieval scriptorium, a monk's quill scratched across parchment, preserving Ptolemy's star charts line by painstaking line. These silent scribes weren't just copying texts, they were sewing a lifeline across centuries, ensuring that Arabic numerals, Greek geometry, and Persian eclipse tables survived wars, plagues, and the slow decay of parchment. A single manuscript might take a year to complete, with monks like those at Monte Cassino checking each column of numbers against the position of Jupiter in the night sky, their marginal notes correcting errors or adding observations like saw the moon eclipse Mars on the feast of St. Lucia. These annotations became a hidden conversation, where a 10th century monk in Cologne might debate a 12th century scholar in Paris through scribbles in the margins, building knowledge brick by brick across generations. Then came the earthquake of the printing press, when Sacrobosco's De Sfera rolled off Gutenberg's presses in 1472. It didn't just spread faster, it evolved. Printers added movable diagrams of lunar phases, typeset zodiac symbols, and blank spaces for readers to jot their own celestial measurements. A well-thumbed copy in Krakow might bear the ink stains of Copernicus himself, while another in Seville could show a navigator's frantic calculations trying to reconcile the text with New World constellations. The magic wasn't just in mass production, it was in the way these books became living records, their margins crammed with generations of hands-on testing. A farmer in Flanders might note that the predicted rising of Arcturus now came 3 days earlier than the printed tables suggested evidence of the Julian calendar's creeping error. What's extraordinary is how these books mirror modern open-source projects. Like software developers forking code on GitHub, medieval scholars adapted texts freely, adding local star maps, tweaking algorithms for their latitude, or scribbling warnings like, "Beware, this eclipse method fails north of York." The Sfera's survival wasn't just about durability. It was about adaptability, with each edition absorbing the best ideas from Jewish timekeepers, Islamic astronomers, and even illiterate farmers who reported anomalies. When Tycho Brahe used these communal corrections to revolutionize astronomy in the 1580s, he stood on the shoulders of countless unnamed annotators. Now, here's a nugget to chew on. The oldest surviving printed De Sfera contains a handwritten recipe for ink made from crushed oak galls and iron salts right beside a diagram of the celestial spheres. It's a perfect snapshot of medieval science, part poetry, part practicality, always with room for improvement. So next time you glance at a digital star map, spare a thought for those ink-stained fingers that kept the cosmos legible long enough for us to inherit it. Long before Columbus set sail with his miscalculated maps, medieval scholars were already calculating the Earth's true size with astonishing precision, using little more than shadows, geometry, and sheer intellectual curiosity. Take the 9th century Persian astronomer Al-Khwarizmi, whose Zij al-Sindhind recalculated Eratosthenes' famous experiment with updated data, landing within 4% of the correct circumference. Or consider the English monk Roger Bacon, who in 1267 cited Arabic sources to argue the Earth's spherical shape and even estimated its size, dismissing flat Earth myths as foolishness unworthy of scholars. These weren't wild guesses, they were meticulous exercises in celestial trigonometry, where measuring the angle of a noonday sun in Baghdad versus Cordoba could reveal the planet's curvature. What's even more remarkable is how these calculations rippled into daily life. When Charlemagne standardized measurements across his empire, his foot-long pes Drusianus was likely calibrated using astronomical ratios, proof that medieval rulers understood the link between cosmic math and earthly governance. Navigators from Genoa to Guangzhou relied on these figures to adjust their sailing routes. knowing that misjudging the Earth's size could strand them in open ocean. Even farmers benefited indirectly. Accurate solar tables derived from these measurements helped predict growing seasons with unprecedented reliability. Yet while Europe and the Islamic world honed their celestial geometry, other cultures developed equally ingenious ways to track time without ever needing the Earth's circumference. In China, water clocks powered by intricate gearwork kept palace schedules running like clockwork, while Inca astronomers used towering stone pillars called sucankas to mark solstices with razor-thin slivers of sunlight. Polynesian navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open Pacific read wave patterns and star paths like a living atlas, memorizing the swell directions tied to seasonal winds without writing down a single equation. The contrast reveals a deeper truth. Medieval timekeeping wasn't a single story but a chorus of voices, each adapting celestial knowledge to their environment. A Benedictine monk tracking Easter's date via lunar cycles would have marveled at a Maya priest predicting Venus's risings with painted codices, just as an Arab trader using an astrolabe to time prayers might have envied the Norse sun compass that guided Vikings under foggy Arctic skies. What united them wasn't the tools they used, but the shared conviction that the heavens held answers, if only humanity learned to ask the right questions. And ask they did, from the Beijing Observatory's sprawling armillary spheres to the portable ivory sundials of Venetian merchants. Every culture's timekeeping devices reflected their unique relationship with the cosmos. The Maya's long count calendar, which measured epochs longer than modern geologic eras, coexisted with the Aztecs' ritual Tonalpohualli, a 260-day cycle woven into daily life like celestial poetry. Meanwhile, in Timbuktu's bustling universities, scholars cross-referenced Arabic star charts with Songhai folktales about the Pleiades' seasonal appearances, blending calculation and tradition in ways that would baffle modern scientists. This global tapestry of timekeeping didn't just measure hours, it shaped civilizations. When the Khmer Empire built Angkor Wat with corridors aligned to equinox sunrises, or when great Zimbabwe's architects oriented their walls to Canopus's southern rising, they weren't just marking time, they were etching their place in the universe onto stone. The same sky that guided medieval monks to prayer also steered Polynesian canoes to new islands and told Andean farmers when to plant potatoes. Time, it seems, was never just a number, it was the rhythm of life itself, played on 1,000 different instruments across the medieval world. Across the deserts of China, as early as the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago, water clocks known as Lu weren't just timekeepers, they were masterpieces of hydraulic engineering. Imagine a series of interconnected bronze vessels, each dripping water at a carefully calibrated rate, while floating indicators marked the hours on vertical scales. These weren't simple timers. The most advanced versions, like the one built by the polymath Su Song in the 11th century, incorporated mechanical escapements and celestial globes that mirrored the night sky. While European monks tracked canonical hours by the stars, Chinese astronomers used these water-driven marvels to predict eclipses and regulate imperial ceremonies with split-second precision. Half a world away, the Maya carved their own relationship with time into the limestone of Chichen Itza. Their observatory, El Caracol, wasn't just a building, it was a stone calendar. Narrow slit windows aligned with Venus's extreme rising and setting points, while the serpent shadows slithering down the steps of Kukulkan's pyramid during equinoxes acted as a celestial checkpoint. The Maya didn't just observe the heavens, they encoded time into their architecture, creating a three-dimensional almanac where shadows and sunlight whispered the dates of planting, war, and sacred rites. What's striking isn't just the sophistication of these systems, but how they emerged independently to solve universal human dilemmas. In the Andes, Inca astronomers used pillars called sucancas to mark the solstices by threading sunlight through precisely spaced gaps, a method eerily similar to the window alignments in Gothic cathedrals half a globe away. Meanwhile, Polynesian navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean without compasses memorized the rising and setting points of over 200 stars, their knowledge passed down through chants that functioned as living star catalogues. These parallels reveal something profound. When faced with the same unchanging sky, cultures separated by continents and centuries arrived at eerily similar solutions. The Chinese water clock's escapement mechanism foreshadowed Europe's mechanical clocks, just as the Mayas' long count calendar, tracking epochs longer than geologic eras, anticipated modern astronomy's deep time reckoning. Even the simplest tools, like the Viking sun compass that used shadow angles to navigate foggy seas, shared DNA with the quadrant's celestial geometry. Yet the differences are just as telling. Where medieval Europe anchored time to liturgical cycles, the Maya viewed it as a spiral of creation and destruction, their calendars interlocking like cosmic gears. In Timbuktu, scholars blended Arabic star tables with Songhai folklore, teaching that the Pleiades' first visibility in June signaled the Niger's flood season, a fusion of calculation and oral tradition unimaginable in Bede's Northumbria. What unites them all is the audacity to reach beyond the obvious. Whether it was an anonymous monk in Normandy calculating tides or a Persian astronomer debugging Ptolemy's star charts, these timekeepers shared a conviction that the cosmos was knowable. Their legacy isn't just in the tools they left behind, but in the stubborn, beautiful idea that humanity could map the rhythms of the universe one shadow, one star, one dripping water clock at a time. Medieval timekeepers didn't just measure moments, they wove the fabric of time itself from starlight and shadow, turning the chaos of the cosmos into something humans could hold in their hands. Their genius wasn't in inventing timekeeping from scratch, but in listening to the sky's ancient rhythms and translating them into tools that shaped empires. Every mechanical clock ticking today, every calendar alert on your phone, even the GPS guiding your drive, these all trace their lineage back to monks tracking solstices with sundials, sailors navigating by Polaris, and scholars scribbling eclipse predictions in the margins of manuscripts. Their legacy isn't locked in museums, it's embedded in the very way we structure our lives. Take something as mundane as your morning alarm. When it buzzes at 7 a.m., that number is a direct descendant of the medieval canonical hour of prime, originally tied to sunrise. The time zones that synchronize global flights, they're a modern twist on the local solar time monks once measured with cathedral dials. Even the algorithms behind satellite navigation owe a debt to the trigonometric tables painstakingly compiled by Arabic and European astronomers who mapped the stars centuries before silicon chips existed. The past isn't just prologue, it's the operating system running beneath our daily routines. Yet for all our precision, we've lost something vital. Medieval timekeepers didn't just observe the heavens, they conversed with them. A farmer feeling the first autumn chill as Arcturus faded at dawn, or a midwife timing births by the moon's phase, understood time as a relationship, not just a number on a screen. Their tools, from astrolabes to candle clocks, demanded participation, aligning, measuring, adjusting. In a world where atomic clocks tick imperceptibly and apps deliver the time without us even asking, we've traded that intimacy for convenience. Here's the beautiful paradox. Their primitive methods often grasped truths our digital age obscures. When a medieval architect aligned a cathedral to catch the solstice sunrise, or a scribe noted that the Julian calendar had drifted 10 days off the solar year, They recognized time as a partnership between human ingenuity and cosmic order. We've since split that bond, outsourcing timekeeping to machines so flawless we've forgotten how to read the sky ourselves. But the stars haven't gone anywhere. Orion still rises in winter, the moon's face still cycles through its phases, and the Big Dipper's handle still points to Arcturus in spring, just as it did when beads quill scratched across parchment. So tonight, step outside, let your eyes adjust to the dark, and trace the constellations medieval monks knew by heart. Notice how Polaris hangs fixed while Cassiopeia wheels around it like a celestial clock hand. You don't need an app or a telescope, just the same curiosity that guided a Benedictine's finger along an astrolabe's brass curves. In that moment, you'll touch a thread stretching back centuries, when time wasn't something to be managed but marveled at. And if you feel inspired, share your stargazing stories below, because the sky, like history, is best explored together. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past that still shape our present. The next time you check your phone for the hour, remember, you're carrying forward a story that began with shadows on stone and stars over the sea.